This is the In Focus podcast from The Hindu.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hindu's In Focus podcast. I'm Zubaida Hamid, your host for today. As of February 1st, a total of 140 cases and 4 deaths due to Guillain Barré Syndrome have been reported in Pune, Maharashtra. The cluster of cases has shocked the public. Most people have never heard of this rare autoimmune neurological disorder before. Guillain Barré Syndrome, or GBS, leads to the immune system attacking the peripheral nervous system, causing weakness in the muscles and, in some cases, paralysis. At present, doctors in Pune have said that the outbreak may be linked to a bacterial infection that many of the patients contracted prior to showing symptoms. The Pune health authorities are testing water samples in all the areas where the outbreak has been reported. But how did a rare condition show up in so many people at the same time? What could be behind the large number of cases? How is it treated? And what could be done to prevent future outbreaks? We discuss these questions and more with Dr. S.V. Khadilkar, Dean Professor and Head of the Department of Neurology, Bombay Hospital, and past President, Indian Academy of Neurology. Good evening, Dr. Khadilkar, and welcome to the Hindus in Focus podcast.
Very good evening. Thanks for asking me to be here.
Doctor, following the recent outbreak in Pune of more than 100 GBS cases now, could you explain to us what this condition is?
Yes. GBS is a short form for a disease that is named after two people, Guillain and Barre. It's actually named after four people, Guillain Barre, Landry, and Stroll, but commonly it's called GBS. It's been around for almost 100 years or a little over 100 years, and we know the condition very well. It's not something that is new, but the outbreak has brought it to focus. Basically, what happens is that from the environment, an antigen comes in contact with the body. And as you know, whenever a foreign antigen comes in contact with the body creates antibodies. And somehow, with a kind of a chance occurrence, that the antigen that has come in contact with the body is very similar to the facing of the peripheral nerves. Peripheral nerves are the nerves that go to hands, legs, face, speech, everywhere. So because the antigen is very similar to the peripheral nerve, body creates a response for the antigen which actually goes towards the peripheral nerve. This is called molecular mimicry. So body has created a defense against something that has come from outside. But in reality, it has started affecting the peripheral nerves themselves. And then the nerves have a dysfunction. They can't function properly. And then people become weak. They also have tingling, numbness, or pain in hands and feet, swallowing difficulty, and sometimes breathing difficulty. So, in short, GBS is an immunological disease which is created by molecular mimicry. And we have been seeing this year after year, decade after decade.
Thank you, Doctor. That was a very comprehensive explanation. You said it was an immunological disease. It's not been extremely common, correct?
Yes,
And up until now, it hasn't been viewed as an outbreak or epidemic causing illness, correct?
right.
Are we now changing the way we think about it?
No. See, basically, GBS has been around year after year. And some people feel that in the rainy season, the cases become more. But they are there all the time. What has happened probably in the case of the recent outbreak is that there is a particular organism, a microbe, which goes into the GI tract. It's called Clostridium jejuni, which goes from contaminated water into our stomach and the intestines. It creates diarrhea, and body creates antibodies against this Clostridium jejuni, which then go on to the peripheral nerve. So this is one small subtype of the organisms that can cause GB syndrome. And this particular organism comes through contaminated water. Therefore, a clustering of cases occur. So one may call it outbreak. Yeah, it's a cluster of cases because there is a source for this organism for so many patients, but it's not an epidemic as such. It's a cluster.
Tell us, doctor, pointed to one particular bacterial infection that is probably behind many of these cases. Does it happen to everybody who get that
No,
particular
no, no,
infection or
no,
not? No.
no, no, no. It is entirely individualized. So if 100 people got the Clostridium jejuni, and I think a lot of us keep getting it from contaminated water or contaminated food everywhere in the world. But only a minority will then develop GBS. So one need not think that because the water is contaminated, you come in contact with it, you will develop a GBS. It's not an infectious disease. It's an aberrant immune reaction to a particular organism. So very few people will get it.
What do we know about the incidence of this in India, doctor? Has this been the largest ever reported cluster of cases here?
I would think so, but one has to put it in perspective that we now live in a time where information spreads very rapidly, sometimes too rapidly. So it is possible that there could have been similar things in the past which are not uh, so reported. But yes, in the recent times, this would be one of the common ones. There was also a worry about COVID virus doing it, and things like that. But yes, this is one of the prominent instances recently.
So it's definitely a post immune reaction, as you said, correct? Sorry, a post infection immune reaction.
Correct.
So tell us a little bit more about the bacteria or suspected bacteria or viruses that cause this. What do we know about them?
A whole lot of viruses and bacteria can cause this type of a molecular mimicry. The two common sets are one are the respiratory tract viruses, the viruses that produce common cold, sore throat, body ache, flu like illness. Those are more common than those that go to the GI tract and produce diarrhea, loose motions, abdominal pain, fever, things like that. So, in general, it's the respiratory viruses that are more common with GBS, and in a small proportion, it is the gastrointestinal. And it's not mandatory that every patient will remember having had an infection in the few weeks preceding the illness. There is a good one third number of people in whom they don't remember having anything. So when there is an infection, it could be respiratory, less likely gastrointestinal, and in some people there is nothing.
So then why, doctor, do we know why it happens? Does not happen to many people, but happens in a small subset of people. This means that if there are 140 cases in Pune, that far more people were infected, but this subset
Yes,
actually developed.
correct,
Okay.
correct. That is true. Far more must have been affected in the GI tract. There are also the host factors and the parasite factors. Like the Clostridium jejuni, also, even though you call it one organism, every time the organism divides, its immunity changes. So within the Clostridium jejuni, there are so many divisions occurring, and with every division, their immunity changes. So it is possible that this particular one had such an immunological material in it that it people reacted in this way. Also, there are host factors. The every host reacts differently, so every human being will react differently to Clostridium jejuni coming into the system. So there are host factors, there are environmental factors, and in environmental factors you have the temperature, the general nutritional status, the general immunity of the person, the atmosphere related issues that we don't understand, and then there are factors related to the bacterium. So here somehow all these factors seem to have been sort of collated such that more number of people got GBS.
In such a situation, what is the public health response? Do we track down the source of infection? How do we respond to this?
I think this is where the epidemiologist, the virologist, the bacteriologist come into picture, and there are institutes like the National Institute of Virology and the Preventive and Social Medicine departments. The first job will be to track down, if possible, from where the cluster is as to what is happening. And in this case, I think it has been tracked down to waterborne situation, and then how to stop it. See, there are lots of places in India where well water is being used. The municipality or the government water doesn't reach them. So these have a little more propensity for developing things like these. The river waters are very much polluted. Just now, the Mahakumbh is going on with 8 crore individuals going there in the water. So there are all these different factors.
Talk to us a little bit about the treatment that is being given, that should be given, and that is being given to the patients. How early do we need to diagnose it, and what are the treatment options available?
I think you asked a very important question. When the disease begins, it usually begins with some mild symptoms that people may have tingling and numbness in hands or feet, and they may feel a little weak, and they often don't think much about it for a day or two. But then the weakness starts increasing, and then they realize that, look, this is something different. And over a period of next few days, it starts getting more and more dense. Often people cannot walk, they cannot use their hands, and in very severe cases, they have difficulty in swallowing food, difficulty in breathing, and those are the two most difficult parts of this problem. If you're not able to breathe, then you have to go on the ventilator. If you're not able to swallow, then you have to eat through the nasogastric tube, you have to be fed through the nasogastric tube. So, from a very mild form where some little bit of weakness and tingling comes and then it recovers, the most severe form is the one where patients go on ventilator and they remain on ventilator for a while and then they start improving. So, this disease is not to be taken lightly. If there are symptoms like that, you should quickly go and see a doctor, and preferably a neurologist, because sometimes it takes time for other specialties to understand that they're dealing with a GB syndrome. It's not a common disease. Once a doctor suspects GB syndrome, the, he will usually admit you in the hospital, because we know that it's a progressive disease. People can get weaker, and therefore it is better that they are in the hospital. Luckily, two types of very effective treatments are now available on GBS. One is called the intravenous immunoglobulin, and the other is called plasma exchange. The plasma exchange is like the dialysis. Blood is removed through a machine, filtered, and put back. So, this removes some of the antibodies that are circulating and that have not yet gone and settled onto the nerves. And this is done every alternate day for 5 cycles or 7 cycles, depending on how you're doing. The second treatment is called intravenous immunoglobulin, where every day an injection is given over 4 to 6 hours for 5 days, and then it keeps on catching the effect. So, these two very effective medications are available. And in addition to that, you need a good ICU setup. You need a good intensivist to look at your intake, output, temperature, and other stuff. And you need a specialist who can look after ventilator if the patient goes on ventilator. So this requires multi-specialty care, but effective medicines are available, and in most of the instances the results are gratifying, people get better, and it's actually so nice to see.
But this is expensive treatment.
Yeah, the treatments are expensive, and treatments also are specialized. Like plasma exchange is not available in every setup. Usually, in hospitals where there are good kidney departments, plasma exchange is done there. So it's not available everywhere, and it is expensive. Every plasmapheresis cycle will cost about 40,000 rupees, and the intravenous immunoglobulin for 5 days will cost about 2.5 to 3 lakhs of rupees, depending on the body weight and things like that. So, yes, they are expensive treatment, and they have to be given quickly for the best results.
So you said that in most cases people do recover. What is the recovery like? And in some cases, what happens? Do they become very critical?
As a general statement, it is correct to say that patients improve, most patients improve. But there are types of GBS. There are various areas of the nerve that can get affected. Like sometimes only the covering of the nerve is affected, which we technically call myelin. There are other patients in whom the nerve itself is affected, nerve fiber itself is affected, which we call axonal GBS. So within the umbrella diagnosis of GBS, there are these subtypes. When the covering is affected, that we call myelin, patients usually do extremely well, and they are either completely normal or nearly normal in a few weeks' time. When the nerve fiber itself is affected, what is called the axonal type of GBS, that takes a much longer time and therefore much longer care, much persistence from the doctors, patients, families. So these patients take many, many weeks to start improving, and a little bit of a deficit may remain behind. So, as a blanket statement, most people recover extremely well. A lot of them become completely normal, but some of them take a long time and may require a little bit maybe left behind. Also, if somebody is on ventilator for a month, month and a half, other complications come like pneumonia, problems of lying down, deep vein thrombosis. So longer the illness, other factors start coming in. But on a whole, I think it is positive. People do well.
Do they need rehab after that?
Yes. Once they start improving, the focus shifts from acute neurological care to rehabilitation. And that's where, like I said, in multi specialty, you need a full rehab team to really work on them. And those hospitals that have a rehab team, patients do better. Obviously so.
So, unlike other autoimmune conditions, this comes once, it goes away, and it does not come again?
By and large, yes. By and large, this is a one time hit and run story because it is very unlikely that such a molecular mimicry may happen again. But 5% of GBS patients recur, and the recurrences may come after 1 year, 2 years, or many years. So, by and large, yes, it is only once in a lifetime. If you survive it and go back, you go back. But you can be a little unlucky and it can come back.
Right. Doctor, there has been some theories, speculation on social media about the link between vaccines and GBS. Could you demystify that for us?
There is a lot of discussion on that, particularly when COVID came around, because everyone was vaccinated. At least a very large chunk of the population was vaccinated. And in fact, there was a feeling in Britain that they're seeing more GBS. But when they actually got down to the figures, facts, and associations, they clearly realized that it has not increased. It is like what was there in earlier years. So, a broad comment again is that vaccines generally do not lead to GBS. Now, an occasional awkward immunological reaction can come to vaccine, any vaccine. And occasionally, a patient can get a neuropathy that looks like GBS. But by and large, one need not get worried about vaccines producing GBS. That's only once in a while that you see. Also, after the COVID, the World Federation of Neurology instituted a committee to look at the incidents and the cases reported for GBS and other neuropathies related to COVID and to vaccines. And I happened to be part of the committee. We really saw about 400 and odd papers that were published in literature, but there was no substantial link between either vaccine and neuropathy or COVID and neuropathy. So I think we need not worry on that count. Though one should be aware that an occasional unlucky person can get an immunological reaction to a vaccine which looks like GBS.
That is good to hear, Doctor. Thank you. Final question, if you could just give us a broader public health view on, we have seen now this 140 cases in Pune. There have been a few mentions and reports in West Bengal and in Telangana. What do we need to do as public health measures in order to avoid this? We spoke a little bit about surveillance of water, but what else, like to avoid such an cluster of cases in the future?
It basically, when it is waterborne, then the number of cases are more. So, contamination of water will need to be prevented when such an instance comes to light. And in general, hygienic living. And one other problem is we are overpopulated. So, even viral infections are around all the time. So, take using a mask when you're going in public, making sure that your immunity stays good. These are other things that one could do for oneself. Particularly vitamin D is now being linked more and more. Now meaning last few years has been linked to immunity. And a lot of our population, particularly the vegetarian people, are deficient in vitamin D and B12, and therefore they get a little more susceptible to all kinds of diseases. So one should make sure that the vitamin D and B12 are normal. The hygienic habits for food, hygienic habits for clothes washing, hygienic habits for water drinking, all these go a long way.
Thank you so much for speaking to us today, Dr. Khadilkar.
No, it was a pleasure. You touched upon a very important topic which is really relevant at this point in time, and thanks for bringing this to everybody's attention. Thank you.
In Focus will be back soon with analysis of the biggest news issues. In the meantime, you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and other platforms. Just search for In Focus by The Hindu. We'll see you soon.